I was born in Georgetown, but I'm a lifelong resident of Pawleys Island. My parents are Isaac and Myrtle Deas. My oldest sibling is Linda Sue Pickett Knox, and my younger brother is Isaac Thomas Deas. Yes. Now, my brother went there for kindergarten. He couldn't take it. It was just too much. Yeah, no, but I think it was, you know, other family members, the other kids he was playing with. He wanted to go ride the bus and, you know, those kinds of things. But my sister, who did not attend that school because she, this is the older sister, we have different moms. And she went to public schools, but her two children, she lived in Murrells Inlet at the time. I think she was actually in Horry County. She lived, and it's right across the line. So that's why. But she brought her children to school to Miss Ruby's school. And she was a school teacher in Horry County, but she brought her kids. I know her daughter went, I think from kindergarten to 5th grade, because by that time, they were no longer going up to 8th grade. You know, it kept going back and back and back. So I think my niece went through kindergarten. And then my nephew went, I know he was there when he was 4, but I don't know. She might have had some transportation issues and whatever, so he wasn't able to go. But he was even on CBS, NBC or something. They came to the school and did an interview with him. Of course, he was, like I said, 4. But I think it was because of his reading abilities or something. I think it just brings back good memories. That was a good time for me. Of school, you know, I went on and got a graduate degree, but you segment your school years, and I was at Holy Cross Faith Memorial for 9 years. And so that was just a fun time, because after I left there, I went into culture shock when I went into public schools. You know, it was just a happy time, carefree time. The culture shock was that the students talked back to the teachers. You know, they did gestures behind the teacher's back. They threw spitballs, and you know, they made noise in class and that kind of thing. And you know, after being at the same school for 9 years, I just was not used to that kind of behavior, and it was scary. When I was there and involved in that school, not only Miss Ruby, but her husband, Reverend Forsythe, also, they instilled in us that you could do anything you wanted to do. There were no failures. We didn't even think in terms of, you know, not being able to succeed in school. I mean, that was an expectation, and that's just what we did. I mean, we didn't know there was an alternative. I didn't know there was an alternative. Well, when I was there, and he, you know, of course, he was the headmaster of the school, and he was in charge. You know, when I grew up, men were in charge of everything. And so he certainly was there, and he was in charge of the school. So both of them were disciplinarians, but he was more the disciplinarian than she was. And certainly from kindergarten through 4th grade, I was in Miss Ruby's class. And then from 5th to 8th grade, I was in Reverend Forsythe's class. And I think the difference for me was, you know, and she was by no means lenient. But back then, they were allowed to issue corporal punishment in the schools. And they did that. And so for me, he was it was kind of scary. So I never got a whipping from him. Now I got my share kindergarten through 4th grade, but nothing from 5th through 8th, because back then the classroom was divided by a divider, and so they had that closed. For most of the time, we weren't the 4th and under were in one classroom, 5th. But anyway, everybody was in the same classroom, and Reverend Forsythe, he held his classes up on the stage. There was a stage in his classroom, but that was also where you got your whippings. So you were on stage when you got your whippings. So, I didn't ever want to be on stage. And then I was just afraid of, how severe it would be. It looked awful. So I didn't ever engage. I didn't do anything that would get me up on that stage for a whipping. Never.
Okay. So what did Reverend Forsythe use?
Well, they said that thing was a, what do you call it, a fan belt. Yeah. Yeah. I think he was tall. She was petite. So he appeared tall, very dark skinned. And I can see his face. I mean, I can actually see his face. But he, you know what? Even though he was the disciplinarian and he frightened me, he was always kind to me. He was always so nice, and not in that regard. I just didn't do anything because I saw what happened with other folks. But he didn't frighten me in that regard. He was always nice and pleasant and all that. But when you behaved, you didn't have any issues. So in that regard, and I mean, for me, and like I said, it was kind of frightening because he would chastise the boys, but he would also chastise the girls. It wasn't any different when things like, I remember when we were in the 8th grade, because, he was the minister at Faith Memorial, and we had to learn scriptures all the time. And, we were assigned scriptures, and so at the end of this month, you needed to know this scripture and whatever. And I remember this girl didn't know the scriptures in the 8th grade, and back then you couldn't wear pants. You had to wear dresses and whatever. And boy, she was dancing around the stage because he was, ooh, it's like what I learned. No, with that belt thing, it just helped me not to forget what I learned. They reinforce a lot of the stuff that you got at home, and for those kids who didn't get it at home. And I know one thing that did happen, talking about misbehaving, but I remember going home, and of course you couldn't do this today, but I remember going home with tape on my mouth, and of course you couldn't remove that stuff off your mouth. You just had to go home and wait until they ask you, why you have tape on your mouth. I was talking too much, and then your mother took it off, and then you got another whipping for coming home with tape on your mouth. That only happened once though, and that happened before I was 8. So it was somewhere, because I first went to this school when I was 4. Between 4 and 8, that happened. But I do remember that, and I remember that the lady that I rode with, Miss Lala Green, you got in the car, but you knew not to take it off in the car because she would have told. And all the other kids, they're walking you home. So, they could see make sure you didn't take it off before you got in the house, so. Well, I think, when I was there and I had all my relatives, not all of my relatives, but many of my relatives that I was close to, they went to public school. And they would tease us all the time about having to go to that school and being there all day, because we got to school about 8 o'clock and we left we got back home about 5 or 5:30. And I do remember that we were teased about that all the time. But it never made a bit of difference. I mean, we were at school and we were just fine. I didn't know any other classmates at the school who cared about whether we were there all day or not. And I just remember it was a time when you could go outside and play. I mean, our recesses, you know, we weren't afraid of anybody abducting us from the playground or whatever, because you know, it was we used to call it back the field, and it is now where the new church is. It was back in that area, and we would just go back there with swings and the ball field and all that, and we'd just go play. And then there was the other area where more where the pool is, in front of the swimming pool, and back behind there were some camp buildings or what have you. And we'd go back there and play house and all kinds of things during school, you know, during our recesses and stuff. And it was just a fun time. And learning wasn't bad either. I mean, again, we were expected to learn, but, you know, everybody helped everybody, and, you know, it was a lot of success there. And when we went on to other schools, we were told that we were going to be successful, so we didn't think anything else about it. Of course, there wasn't a bus or anything to pick you up, so your parents had to provide a ride for you. And early on, you know, there was this lady, Miss Lala Green. She had a big old station wagon, so she loaded kids up in the state. She'd go around, pick you up and load you up, and we'd get there. And in the mornings, of course, like I tell people, I don't know why I would ever forget any of these things, but you know, you started your day with the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalms, scripture reading, and all of that. And that's how you ended the day too. We prayed in the morning, we prayed in the afternoon, in the evenings before we left, we prayed midday. So that's how the day started. And when I was over on Miss Ruby's side, she would ordinarily start with the younger children, I guess because the younger ones needed more attention to get settled. But she would, you know, as you came in, we were set up, you know, kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth. And when you got to fourth grade, you were able to sit by the window where you could see cars or people come up. So the older you got, the more, you know, further. Yeah, when you were in 5th through 8th grade, you couldn't see anything. The way he had that classroom set up, you know, you didn't see anybody until they actually came to the door. But that's how the day started, and she would start with the younger children, but everybody had their assigned work. And one of the things that, when I knew about this interview, that I thought about, because my handwriting has gotten so awful, is I remember handwriting classes, and Miss Ruby's handwriting was just so pretty. You know, that chart that they give you with the letter writing, that's what her handwriting looked like, with the little swirls and what have you. And I just remembered, you know, we had our routine. We knew what to come in to do. She'd give us worksheets and various things. So she'd get you set up, and you'd work on what you were assigned to work on until she moved to your age group. And it wasn't always just a grade. You know, if you were in kindergarten but you had started reading, then you would work with the first graders. Or if you were a third grader who had some issues, you might be reading with the first graders. And there were some combined classes like science and those kinds of things. She did those classes together. And it was the same thing when you got 4th through 8th grade. Of course, those classes seemed to be a bit more formal, you know. She would, you know, back then you had to, and I don't know if they do it in classrooms now, but there was a lot of group reading. You had to read out loud and have discussions. So we had our books, and it was basically stuff out of the book. We didn't have any labs or experiments or anything brought in for us to do hands-on. It was strictly out of the book. So we read the book as in all the classes, everybody had to read out loud, which I think they probably still need to do that today. But we read out loud, and we had, you know, discussions, and then she would give us just tests. Oh, you brought your lunch. So whatever your parents provided for you. And then they sold snacks, though. So you could, there were certain times, during lunchtime, they would sell you snacks. So you could go, if you behaved properly. I mean, it didn't matter that you had money. You still, if you weren't behaving, you couldn't go buy a snack. No, you weren't allowed. But we brought our lunches with us, so whatever your parents provided. Yeah, and then we just go out and have our little picnic lunches, because there were different areas where we could, you know, this little group and this little group and whatever. And the other part I remember, it was always fun because you were always in contact with the younger children, so the older you got, you could look over the younger kids and kind of tend to them, you know, during the breaks and stuff, and they would allow you to help the younger children in your, and that was more Miss Ruby's group. Once we got to older, you know, we didn't tend to help each other as much, but like if you're in the 4th grade, you could help somebody in kindergarten. And back then, we didn't call it kindergarten. We all knew that we were in big first or little first. And you're little first, I guess that was kindergarten, and big first was just regular 1st grade. Oh, well, we played hopscotch. We played, you know, those like Ring Around the Rosie and those kinds of games. We played ball. We were allowed to go on the ball field, and we weren't allowed to go back the field, is what we call it, all the time. That was, you know, and maybe that was times when they had time to observe us or what have you. But that wasn't somewhere you could go without permission. You could be out on the yard for recess, but you had to have special permission to go back to the field, and that's where they had the swing sets and all that stuff. But that was also Camp Baskerville, and so it was the summer camp that children came from around the state, I believe, to the camp. And so those things like the swing set and all that, you know, were part of the summer activities also, just like, you know, that swimming pool and all that stuff was there for summer camp. And that's why, and you know, we just chased it. It didn't take much. We'd go out and pull up grass and make the little dolls and, you know, that kind of, we did that kind of stuff. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I mean, education was the one thing that everybody said to you would make your life better. I mean, that's something that your parents instilled in you, and that's why when I got to high school, I didn't understand why people talked in class and acted up, because education, you know, was going to help us all. So, you know, that's in my family. My parents, in fact, my father graduated from that school as far as he went. That school, this is what he said, went to the 11th grade when my father was at the school. So he went to the 11th grade. My mother went to, she graduated from the high school here in town at that time, and she went through the 12th grade. But they just said to me that education was important and that all of us needed to have one. And I mean, they had that expectation, but that was instilled early on because, you know, like I said, Miss Ruby and Reb, they always expected us to do well, or I always felt that they expected me to do well, so I didn't have any other alternative. And I know when I was raising my child, you know, it was important for me to say, do your homework and monitor and whatever, but my parents never did any of that. I don't remember them ever say, do your homework. I mean, they didn't, yeah, they never said, do your homework. They never said, let me see your homework. They never did any of that. But I mean, I think they knew when I was at Miss Ruby in school that, you know, that was taken care of. I wasn't going back to school without homework, but they never said that to me. I think for a lot of people, my understanding was, you know, that was the only school for blacks for a while. And I guess by the time I went there, you know, it had slacked off the attendance and all that. But for a long time, that was the place they could go to get that education. And I think that was instilled in other people as they grew up, even people who didn't attend the school. You know, they had respect for the school and the students that came out, and like you say, manners. And when we got to other schools, we were able to do our work. We didn't have any problem. You know, we were focused and disciplined enough to do our work. And, you know, we had good manners because I guess like me, everybody was like, oh, you know, we didn't know we could do that. Yeah. Well, I work in law enforcement now, and I tell you, I started my job as the juvenile officer with the city of Georgetown. I was the first juvenile officer with the police department, and one of the first things I noticed going back into the schools, because I was in the school a lot of the times, was it was just, I thought it was bad when I went to high school, but the level of control that the teachers had just seemed to be gone, and that was disturbing to me. And I know that there are certain restrictions and rules and regulations in place that they can't do what they used to do. But I do remember in one of the schools, from one year to the next, when there was a new administration at the school. Totally different. I mean, I was the police, and I was scared to go in one of them schools. You know, it was just crazy. Children were totally out of control. The next year, with a new administrator, totally different. So I don't think it can't be done. I just think it's a little different. And like I said, working in law enforcement, I've seen some things in the schools that would never have happened before. And I'm talking about behavior, but I think that's because teachers are limited in what they can enforce. You know, and I can remember being at Miss Ruby's school, and we'd have this little, and I can't sing, but you know, the phonics, there was a little song that we'd sing, and we'd sing for all of them, and I guess until we knew the sound of each letter. But I remember that song early on, so we were all good readers. Well, I think this is beyond being at the school, but you know, after I got out of school, and I'm sure when I had gone to work and had a full-time job and all that, I think one of the things she said to me was how proud she was of me. And, you know, she says, probably what she said to many of her students, but, you know, it's special because she said it to me was, oh, my big girl's doing so good. And, I mean, that, you know, really made me feel good that she was proud of me.